page. It's of a very happy Coola team. They're all in together for a kind of selfie style photo, and the headline is Ace of Clubs. And then the bottom corner they have O'Neill, that's Martin O'Neill, saying we can't lose Rice, and so say all of us. That's Declan Rice he's talking about, who was very, very promising for a 19-year-old making his international debut against Turkey at the weekend. And then bottom right corner, we can pretend we don't look at this stuff, but we're all interested. The Sunday Times Rich List. Rory McIlroy, richer than Connor is their headline. So Rory McIlroy, his wealth increased by 29 million in 2017. So he's gone from 142nd last year to 117th. He's got 125 million to his name, McIlroy. Whereas McGregor is apparently just a new entry on the list, 182 in the world or in Ireland. He has 85 million to his name. And they put what he earned against Mayweather at slightly less than what he put it at. So that's your Sunday Times front page there. The Sunday Independent next, and it's going with the former finance director Ryan. That's Tom Ryan, who's been unveiled as the GAA's new Director General. Tom Ryan, next Director General, succeeds Pádraig Duffy. Ryan, an accountant, they say, has been the GAA's Director of Finance for a decade, a relatively low-key figure, most commonly seen when presenting the GAA's annual accounts, says Dermot Crowe. And beneath that, defiant Wexford dethrone Galway in the hurling. That's your Sunday Independent. Back page of Star Sunday has Jorma number 1. Southgate hints that the Everton stopper will be his main man in Russia. Then we have Sun Sport. Count him in. Again, this is Declan Rice. All hands on deck is a good headline there. Neil O'Riordan says Martin O'Neill admits he would be gutted to lose Declan Rice to England, but insists that he is not another Jack Grealish. And it certainly looks that way if you saw even Rice's post-match interview at the weekend, and his father was at the game as well on Friday night. Back page of the Mail on Sunday then, outrage. This is Kevin McStay. He's not happy with the way the Division 2 fixtures are going. This is Michael Clifford on the back page. McStay hits out at GAA's high-stakes gamble on fixtures. Kevin McStay has labelled the GAA's decision not to allow Division 2 of the Alliance Football League to be completed on the same day as outrageous. So McStay says there's a huge risk involved. This is with Down and Tipperary and Louthmead still having to be played if required after today. And McStay says there's a huge risk involved. It is wrong to all the teams who have something at stake that a standalone fixture could yet be played that could impact the rest. He says it's outrageous. I don't think there's much anyone can do about it at this stage. Back page then of the Sunday World. Wexford sign off in style. This is Sean Murphy signing autographs for very happy Wexford fans. There's a great buzz down there at the moment. And to be or not to be. This is Toby Alderweireld, who Manchester United are chasing, and they're not surprisingly willing to throw Luke Shaw into the deal. Picture of him looking fairly bereft, as he has been for most of his Manchester United time. Pogba then finally, Sunday People. Jose will sell flop Pogba to fund 200 million transfer spree. He's looking to get rid of Paul Pogba, Jose. And then finally, Sunday Mirror, we have Pep is a dog. Is the headline. This is Mino Raiola, who has branded Pep Guardiola a coward and a dog in a blistering attack on the Manchester City manager, no less. He says Pep Guardiola, the coach, is fantastic. As a person, he's an absolute zero. He's a coward, a dog. He's a classic priest. Do as I tell you, don't do what I do, says Mino Raiola, who's also Zlatan's agent, who didn't get on very well with Pep Guardiola at Barcelona. So, that's the back pages. Let's turn to some of the inside pages. A story, Kieran, which ran all week, and we might just round it off. We did plenty of it here in the show, so we won't do too much on this. But we had presumed the Sports Capital programme would be discussed. It's not as widespread, the coverage, as maybe I'd anticipated. Maybe people feel there's not much more to say on it. But John Green, who in fairness has written about this for years and years and years, touches on it in the Sunday Indo, and Mick Foley does as well in the Sunday Times.
Yeah, I think it's all your fault, you guys, that there isn't much more on, because you covered a lot of the bases during the week. But
with too many shows.
Yeah, too many shows. But also, I think the week that was in it helped you to go into it in depth, because there's no Premier League. The rugby was over.
Yeah.
Ireland Turkey friendly didn't really capture the imagination. The GA leagues, a lot of things were more or less decided before today. So it did give you a fair bit of scope to get into, which is a very important issue. Like, I've gone to a lot of these grant announcements over the years, and the one journalist that's always there is John. Like, John Green has always taken a huge interest in sports funding, which isn't a very sexy topic, but is a very important one.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Yeah.
So for people who admittedly don't find this very sexy and find government grants a fairly dense and muddled picture to try and get a hold of, we're talking about the Sports Capital Programme, which has been running for about 20 years now. And it's dished out a lot of money and done lots of good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This blew up because Shane Ross during the week tweeted very happily that 150 grand went to a private school in his constituency, Wesley College. And the optics of that kind of stank. And there has been a tradition with the Sports Capital Programme, as John touches on and Mick Foley touches on, of constituencies in the Minister for Sports domain doing very well.
Yeah, like I remember, I think it was either 2000 or 2001, and I wrote about this, and it was actually put in the front page of the paper. The headline was "Jim will fix it," because the headline stuck out for me. But it was when Jim McDade was Minister for Sport, and how well Donegal did in that. And the money has seemed to follow ministers of sport and Minister for Finance over the years. And it's like John's main point is that it's time to park it and reassess what we want to do with this kind of grant scheme and come back with something that is fairer and more equitable. And there's a strong case for that. Like you guys did a piece in the Liberties the other day about the lack of sports facilities there. So where I used to live before I got married, where Andy lives, and I was talking to Andy about this outside, but part of the problem in the Liberties, like there's no pitch there, but there aren't many green spaces that you could put a pitch on, as far as I can see, because it's very built up.
Yeah, it's one of the most densely populated, areas of the country, and there's absolutely no sports pitches in the hub. There's one tarmac pitch in between Mead Street and Francis Street,
right?
And the kids are playing there, but there's no green pitches like be AstroTurf or all weather pitches or even a grass pitch. But funnily enough, there seems to be student accommodations on popping up. There's 7 of them in development right now, and there's all these room for other things, but not for the local kids. There doesn't seem to be the appetite, I guess, just to provide these things, and it's badly needed because it is an undeveloped part of the city, and there's all that anti-social behaviour goes along with it when there's nowhere else for them to pour their energy into.
And like we were talking outside as well, like when this the initial Sports Capital grant announcement was made in Arbour Hill Boxing Club
in November.
Yeah, November. But they got 150 grand as well, which is the maximum grant you can get, as well as Wesley. And I think I think you were talking to somebody in Boxing about this. And Boxing were quite happy with what they got.
They were quite happy. I spoke to Fogg Crute, and Boxing did quite well across the board in terms of the clubs. They received just over 1 million, and the stadium received money in order to redevelop it and to do it up. And I think Boxing has done quite well out of it over the years. Compared to when Katie Taylor first started boxing, I think female boxing would have only been 3%, of the participants of amateur boxers. But now it's way up to 25%, and most amateur clubs would have got the funding to, install female change rooms, something simple like that, but it makes a huge difference, So
we're up to 25% of amateur boxers in this country are female.
Yeah, it's booming at the moment. Yeah, it's booming at the moment.
Wow. But as you said, I mean, if there's no female changing rooms, if the basics aren't in place,
there's been a huge push by the IABA to get the female representatives in, and now there's a huge female coaches and the boxers themselves and the officials too. There's a huge representation.
Yeah, but across the board, I think it's right that you do put the microscope in sports funding. It's become a huge issue in the UK now. It cropped up during the Winter Olympics. That skeleton, I think they got 3 medals out of skeleton, but there are only 300 people in the whole of the UK compete in skeleton, and it got something like 5 million in funding for the last Olympic cycle. And basketball, which is 300,000 participants, and a lot of them in deprived and areas, receive 0 funding at the moment. That there's often an obsession with medals, and that's where funding goes. And grassroots is far more important and participation is more important than medals.
Well, that's the wider issue, actually, which I thought Paul Rouse made the point very well on the show here on Wednesday, and then the Minister of State was on Friday, which was a very good conversation. So Paul Rouse made the point that one of the issues here, and we're talking about a sports capital programme where in 20 years they've spent 900 million quid, so it's been not nothing for sure, but there is no sports policy document in the country. There is no vision here that we're working towards. So
and also the dots have never been joined between sport and health. People, there's so much talk about health and people on trolleys and the health. we have a permanent health crisis, and getting people fitter is a strong way of dealing with that. And still, schools have huge problems with PE facilities. A lot of schools.
Well, a lot of schools being built without PE facilities is the issue. So if you have a sports policy document, at least it's something you're working towards, and you can say in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, if someone says, well, how are things going? You can say, well, we're 50% of the way towards our vision, or we're 75% of the way towards our vision. But at the moment, there's no real plan as such. So it's this ad hoc kind of system. Yeah. And I think the sports programme represents that, whereby you just apply, and it's ad hoc, and you might be successful, you might not, and some areas will do better than others because they might have the right people who are making the applications. Like you would think in a constituency, where Wesley is, they're going to have lots of professionals who can get involved. GA clubs in South Dublin who've done very well in the last round of grants will have professionals in their ranks who can fill out the forms and do it very well. Like John Green was in here, incredibly smart man, who said he had done it twice and had misfilled out the form or the application once. So,
and they have tried to simplify that. It used to be 14 pages, now it's 6.
And to be fair,
and John, 6 years ago, 48% of the applications were ruled out, and it was 20% this time. So they have tried to address that in fairness.
Yeah, they've refined it, and John said that. But you've got to think in disadvantaged areas, they mightn't be engaging with the state on that kind of level at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's why John's point of,
and also there's the matching funds as a factor. I think is it 5% you have to raise, but like 5% of 150,000 is still 7,500. And in some areas that's not hard to raise, but in other areas it's a struggle, because you are going basically to the parents of the kids and stuff and asking them for the money, and a lot of times they don't have it.
Yeah.
But I think there's another factor as well.
John Considine made that point very well during the week as well. He said, and Mick Foley quotes him, he says, the SEP has done much good work, but it's also flawed in terms of delivering some aspects of its remit, particularly around assisting disadvantaged areas. And he says the basic premise that any applicant must have already raised a share of the required funds immediately puts those clubs in those areas in a difficult position.
Yeah, and there's another thing as well, Joe. Over the last couple of governments, often the junior minister, like Brendan Griffin, who you had in the other day, takes a large part of the sports portfolio. Yeah. But already this government, the current government, isn't in office that long. But Brendan Griffin's the second junior minister for sport. Patrick O'Donovan was in there before. Yeah. So somebody can be getting their head around the brief and what's needed, and suddenly there's a reshuffle, a new man is in. And I was at I think it was a review into Rio, and Patrick O'Donovan spoke about that, and he travelled to New Zealand, which New Zealand across the board has a great record in sport, in Olympic sports as well as rugby, and it's a similar enough population to Ireland, and looking at what they do, and I thought he spoke really well, and it's interesting he took that initiative. But then a couple of weeks later he was out of the job, Brendan Griffin came in. So it's very hard to continuity of thinking and of planning because of that nature of politics.
Yeah, I don't suspect it will be paused as John Green wants, but it mightn't be the worst idea to close it, ring fence that money so it still be spent. It doesn't have to be closed for a long time, and almost just go around and see, well, who needs it most, who may not be applying for this grant for starters.
Across the two pieces from John Green and Mick Foley is that, a change of system needs to be put in place, I guess. If they do want to reach out and provide facilities for undeveloped areas, that's what's needed, because although this has worked, done a lot of good over the years, it's not reaching the places that really need it, in terms of raising the funds themselves to match the grant. It would be hugely difficult. I was just thinking about an area like the Liberties, where there wouldn't be, many teams that played. It's badly needed a pitch, at least one.
Barry in Portmarnock says the following are facts. Shane Ross's constituency did not get a massive chunk of the grants. 2, he only signed off the grants. He also signed off the initial rejections. These were all appeals. And 3, middle class areas deserve the grants. They support the country through their massive income taxes. But Barry, in fairness, how can you stand over a situation where there's 50,000 people in Dublin South inner city and there's not one single playing field? That's a massive failure. And I think that comes down to the sports policy document, the lack of an overall vision. Because this is just so ad hoc. Your appeal might be good, yours might not be good. Yeah. That's Barry's opinion. I don't think many people would agree with it, to be honest. So we'll see where that goes. It was interesting. Brendan Griffin did say there's a draft of a sports policy document in the pipeline very, very soon. So we may see that in the next couple of weeks, he was saying. Paul Kimmage has done a big feature interview, Andy, with Katrina McKiernan.
Yeah.
This is on page 8 and 9 of the Sunday Independent.
piece, we talk about in the piece to have reluctancy to engage with the media or the press, and it was always kind of hard to get an answer, to really get any insight out of her. But
she hates the limelight.
But I met her recently. We were on a panel show on RTE, and I could see, like, from the woman I met then, I didn't really know much about her personally. It kind of rings true when reading this piece that she was, very well mannered, very, very nice lady, but kind of standoffish in a way as well, and very humble, not really revealing much about her. Like, I wasn't aware that she was 2-time marathon winner, and
probably an underrated Irish sports person, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think a part of the reason for that, and it's brought up in the piece, is because Sonia O'Sullivan was at her peak at the same time as her. They're only born a couple of days apart. And because Sonia's achievements were so remarkable, it was kind of like she was second in the World Cross Country 4 times. Like, and Sonia ended up winning it, and she won the London Marathon. She was stupid. It's funny. This was tweeted a link to, or it was tweeted. Somebody was promoting this last night, either Paul himself or John Green. And the first thing that came into my head was, it's unusual for Paul to interview a woman. He doesn't do it very often. Like. Since he's gone back to Sunday Indo, I think it was Kieran McKiernan and maybe Sinead Jennings, the only two I can remember. And he actually addresses that at the start of the piece. He says, I'm not good at writing about women, or, I found it hard over the years. And he gives an example of a few that he has done. So I thought that grabbed me. And then I was curious about this piece because it gets into very interesting ground at the end, near the end of the interview, that she's now separated, split up from her husband Damien, and I know Damien, so I was wondering would Paul broach this, and it's very affecting because, like, it's something that happens to a hell of a lot of marriages, and it's not a comfortable subject to bring up in a sports interview, but there's just a little bit here. She's on about the medals that she won over the years, that her mother keeps them in a nice frame at home. And Paul says to her, so they obviously meant something. Yeah, of course, until this happens. Yeah, then they meant nothing. They say the greatest of all gifts is peace of mind, and there's no surest saying. It's 100 times better than being a world champion. I had a horrible lump in my stomach for about 4 years. I was grasping at straws. How am I going to gain my confidence again? How am I going to make myself feel good? I started running races again to seek approval and to make me feel good about myself. And she goes on to mention then that she tried counselling, but prayer ultimately was the counselling that worked for her best. And she has found peace of mind now. And her relationship with Damien, they get on okay. They hadn't spoken for 4 years, but she said to get on well with them now. So it's worth a read.
Incredibly honest.
Yeah,
and she spoke openly, and you can see that she is at peace because to be able to speak about it so openly, she's not holding any grudges, and you read this whole as 2 pages, and you read it, and it's only the last few paragraphs where you see that he's really gotten it out of her, and Kim's done really well, it seems, to get this out of her. But
the one criticism I'd have, I wonder, is it too long? Like, the piece is 6,500 words, and generally Paul's pieces always get around that length, or his interviews tend to get 2 pages. And I think the most interesting part of that for me is the last 1,000 words. And will people stick with it till that end? Like, you're taking a leap of faith with people, they will. I think it could have done. It could worked equally as well as it had been half the length.
Yeah, but it's a nice little payoff. It's a nice payoff at the end. You kind of get through all this, and you get a sense of who she was and why her career, why she was never really highlighted as much because of Sonia Sullivan, because of the personality that she was. That she was always kind of guarded from the press and never really opened up herself. But towards the end, she kind of not redeems herself, but opens up a little bit, and it's a great payoff. In the piece,
I like very long reads, but I find a lot of people don't now, and when I see something like that, I think I'd like people to read what's at the end of that, and will people stay with it that long?
Well, it's the only long read in the bloody papers these days, half the time.
Yeah, but I do find, though, with quite a lot of online outlets, they do, because there's no space restriction, they do very long reads, and often I find they could be pruned big time, that they are too long, that the meat of them is being lost because of the length.
What strikes me with this is very interesting is, so the first page a huge chunk of the initial point is about how difficult an interviewee Katrina McKiernan was throughout her career. Paul writes at one point, she's the Bermuda Triangle of our profession, our ultimate nightmare, our Friday the 13th, and he details a few bad press conferences. And then he talks to her a bit about her own career. I mean, I didn't realise she would have went to Sydney as pretty much a favourite, like to win a gold medal. I mean, I knew she'd won huge marathons, but I mean, again, I've underrated her, to be honest.
Yeah.
Passed me by a little bit. And you get to this incredibly personal last 1,000 words, as you say, Kieran. And isn't it interesting that they don't lead with it? Like, this could have been a very almost salacious kind of headline. It could have been...
Yeah, and I like that because...
I think it's fantastic that actually, you know, this incredibly personal stuff is almost at the back
Well,
end.
I like
because
that.
that's a choice that would
I
have
do
been made.
like that they didn't make a headline out of it.
Yeah.
Because I think...
It would have cheapened
I think that's precisely the language to use. I think somebody has been good enough to sit down for a length of time and then talk very honestly about themselves, and it can be cheapened by a headline.
Oh, she could. I don't know her at all, but I would say after this, because again, it gets into incredibly personal stuff. Like, anytime you're talking, and she's pictured as well with her 2 children in the main picture of the piece at their home, presumably when the interview was done. So, like, I mean, you're cognizant of them, you're cognizant of everything. See, and the first half to 3/4 of it is very much about her career, and then suddenly, whoom, out of nowhere, I didn't know she was separated, so it came as a total shock to me. And I would say afterwards she thought, God, I hope this isn't a Katrina, you know, my divorce headline.
Especially with her history of, you know, of being wary of the press and media.
And also her background, I think, Andy, because she brings up like where she's from, Cornafin and Cavan. And I think if you know, when she talks about her background and like the hens and the turkeys at home, and even when her coach was telling her to eat spaghetti, she would have potatoes with the spaghetti. Like, she was very much a country girl background, playing camogie, etc. And I think marriage breakups are harder when you come from that kind of environment, because it's so unusual. You really stand out. And I think it's like Paul asked her about that. Like, she was the only one.
Her brother's shock, and he's wanted to protect her, and you know.
Yeah, like, she's the only one in the family that it's happened to, and that's difficult.
But they handle it really well, like you say, Joe. And yeah, I think it's out of respect for her, because she is, like I said, when I met her, I had no idea she'd done all this, had all these amazing achievements, you know, and. She's so humble and such a nice person, so it's probably out of respect to her that they've handled it with such care.
And she was a big deal. Like, I remember that London Marathon that she won. I was sports editor at the start of the time. We sent a reporter over, Stephen Finn, who now works for the FAI, was sent over to cover it like in advance, because I think people thought she had a chance of winning it. Like, so these days, like, there's no Irish athlete would have a prayer of winning a major marathon like that.
She says, I still hold a lot of the traits I did as an athlete. I still love going to bed early, getting up early. What time is early? During the winter, I'd be in bed by 10, up at 7. What other traits? Eating properly. I don't drink tea. I don't drink coffee at all. No. What about alcohol? No. Not even a glass of wine? No. Jesus. I don't have much opportunity. So I like a simple life, peaceful life, probably more so than before. I'm not like any of my brothers or sisters. They're very much more outgoing. I'm very simple, very plain. What's my favourite meal? Potatoes. And she talks about how even standing in a pub having a few drinks would just be her nightmare. Can't handle that. Just wants the quiet life away from all that stuff. Which I think makes the finale all the more affecting, because it's just totally unexpected, you know.
And it goes to show you a lesson that no matter how you set up in life and how simple or peaceful you want your life to be, there will always be bumps in the road.
Yeah.
You know, there will all and we've heard since that she. And everyone will come through it, you know, with time. And it says in this, time is the greatest healer. And she's got back into sport and into spirituality, praying again. And that's where it is. You have to find the answer. And it seems like she's got back to a peaceful baseline, you know.
And I think even we might leave it there, because you almost don't want to... They almost just like let people read it as a point of thing. Because, I mean, she talks about, well, just frankly, came out of the blue, husband of 13 years, met someone else, it happens, so... Totally probably took her by shock, and a horrific thing to probably process and deal with, but she seems to be in a good place now. So that's well worth the read. I think Katrina McKiernan, page 8 and 9 of the Sunday Independent. We're going to take a very short break, and then we're back with more stuff to get through. Our Sunday paper review is brought to you with Air, the home of Air Sport. Get amazing live sporting content free with Air Broadband. And I should let you know as well, in the hurling, It is Dublin 14 points, Tipperary 115 with the second half just underway. So Tipperary have also had a man sent off, they're down to 14, but they do lead by 4 points with the second half just starting in the league quarter-final. Back in a second.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
In association with the Air Sport app, allowing you to cast your favourite sporting action from your tablet or mobile phone straight to your TV.
The following ad for appliances delivered will be attempted using no bad Easter puns. The Easter sale is now on at appliancesdelivered.ie with exceptional offers like up to 25% off washing machines and dishwashers, up to 35% off refrigeration and small appliances, and an exciting up to 50% off cooking appliances with next day delivery nationwide. So if you're looking for cracking deals, then check out the excellent the Easter sale now on at appliancesdelivered.ie. Why pay more?
I'm Mary, and last year I set up Sun Fun Ireland. They're holidays based entirely around sunshine in Ireland. Sunbathing, beach volleyball, that sort of crack. There's a bit of weather risk involved, alright, but isn't that all part of the fun?
Sun Fun Ireland is not an Energia customer because Sun Fun Ireland is not a clever business. People like Mary don't recognise that switching and slicing up to 20% off your energy bills is just, well, the clever business thing to do. If you're a clever business, visit energia.ie/business to see how you can save. Savings based on our standard business rates. Terms and conditions apply. See energia.ie.
20 years have passed since Katrina McKiernan won the London Marathon and cemented her place as one of the greatest Irish athletes of all time. Winning isn't everything, however, and in this week's Sunday Independent, she tells Paul Kimmage about an extraordinary chapter in her life. The Sunday Independent, the complete read.
The HPV vaccine is safe and effective and protects your daughter against cervical cancer. HSE teams are visiting schools to give the second dose of the HPV vaccine. Most girls have already had the first dose, but if your daughter missed out, she can still get it now. Visit the HSE's hpv.ie website, the only World Health Organisation approved website in Ireland for all the facts about the HPV vaccine. Get the vaccine. Protect our future. From the HSE.
Home. It's where the heart is. The beating, bustling, screaming, shouting, laughing, hugging centre of your world. There's no place quite like it. That's why a move can be a big deal. So if you fancy a friendly mortgage chat, give us a bell or talk to your mortgage broker. But if you're glued to the sofa, our mobile mortgage team can come to you. Get in touch and start experiencing the bank of you at home. KBC, the bank of you. Go on, stick the kettle on. Lending criteria, underwriting terms and conditions apply. The property is mortgaged to secure the loan. Life and home insurance are required. KBC Bank Ireland PLC is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Special occasions should be celebrated, but sometimes big family dinners and nights out mean heartburn and indigestion. Gaviscon Extra gets to work instantly. It forms a protective barrier to help provide fast relief from heartburn and indigestion. Gaviscon Extra contains sodium alginate, sodium bicarbonate and calcium carbonate. Always read the label.
Incognito, the art initiative for the Jack and Jill Children's Foundation, is back. Over 1,500 postcard-sized original pieces by artists including Tracy Emin, Martin Gale, Mo Kelly, Nick Miller, Abigail O'Brien and Richard Gorman. Yours for just €50 each. First come, first served in the Solomon Gallery, Friday 6th to Sunday 8th of April. The catch? You don't know the artist's name until you buy the art. Previewed at the Solomon on April 4th and 5th and on incognito.ie. Proudly supported by William Fry.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
In association with Air. Watch every UEFA Champions League and Europa League game on the Air Sport Pack.
This is News Talk.
Welcome back. We're here in the studio with Andy Lee and Kieran Cunningham. We're looking through the papers. We've touched on a few pieces on the Sports Capital programme thus far, and a very interesting, well-handled piece with Katrina McKiernan in the Sunday Independent. And now we're turning to, unfortunately, Turkey 1, Ireland 0. Good God, said every football writer everywhere. What do I do with this turd? So what have we got? I see page 9. Paul Rowan was writing about Ireland's new shape did little to prevent all too familiar subdued performance against Turkey. Talks about how Ireland failed to register a shot on target all game. And also absent were any of those barnstorming runs from Seamus Coleman, who was pinned back. Says O'Neill's decision to play with 3 centre-halves and therefore beef up Ireland's presence in midfield with the presence of 2 wing-backs was fine in theory, but the execution disappointing. Ireland looked pretty as uncomfortable in possession of the football as they had for much of their World Cup qualifying campaign. Did you watch this game?
Bits and pieces.
It's hard not to reach for the phone at certain points during it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'll flick over to The Simpsons. No, I watched the bits and pieces, and it wasn't great, was it? It's just, and even in the commentators' voices, you could hear there was a lack of enthusiasm. Even when I was watching it when Turkey scored, I was like, "Oh, and there's a goal." Oh yeah, it was. And a goal that could have easily been avoided. My dad,
but it's the same old. It doesn't seem to matter what the personnel is, what the formation is. Did you still end up talking about the same flaws in the way Ireland play? And it was pretty. I thought you don't want to overstate it because it is a friendly, and there's a lot of rookies there. But like even up front, like the last couple of years, Shane Long, since he scored against Germany, how many chances has he had with Ireland? He's chasing lost causes all the time. He's trying to live off scraps. It was the exact same for Scott Hogan and Shawnee Maguire. Like midfield has been bypassed. Like everybody's saying they played 3 at the back. But I thought really they played 5 at the back. Like the full-backs hardly got forward, so it was ultra cautious. And like Declan Rice stood out, but it wasn't hard to stand out because it was just such a morass of mediocrity. And I do like the look of him, and I would like to see him in midfield because I think Duffy and Clark overall, Shane Duffy, Kieran Clark has been a decent enough partnership at the back for Ireland, and I think he's got more to offer in midfield because really with Wes Hoolahan gone now, you do need something different. And I know all the word is that he's completely committed to Ireland, but to me the jury might still be out on that because I look at him and I think, why would England not be really pulling out all the stops to get him? Because I think he has something.
You can't play, shed tears during the national anthem, have your dad for the game, tell everybody on live television nothing is the quote, anything could change your heart with regard to playing for Ireland. Nothing, he said. You can't do all that and then change your mind, can you?
Diego Costa played for Brazil. Now he plays for Spain. So
yeah. O'Neill was asked.
Character, though, wasn't he?
Yes, that's true. O'Neill was. A few people
like from the way
that.
talking, you wouldn't think he would change.
No.
But if I was Gareth Southgate, I would be thinking about taking him to the World Cup. Genuinely, it would become like, even if you're not going to use him, like you can take 23. You don't need 23 players there, but you would bedding them in. And I look at what they have at centre back and centre midfield, and I think this guy is up there.
Yeah, he probably would be. O'Neill, he was compared to Paul McGrath to O'Neill because obviously you can play at the back and his.
Yeah, and you presume O'Neill would draft those
midfield.
comparisons away, and he didn't.
No. Yeah, I thought he'd say, you can't compare anyone to Paul McGrath. He said, I agree entirely. I think he's strong, athletic. He has got good control at this minute. That will improve the more club games he plays. In fairness, he does add. To put that sort of pressure on him, to put him up there with Paul McGrath or Roy Keane, that's making a heck of a lot for a young man, but he certainly has enormous potential. And tonight was about letting him go into a position where he has played often. But in truth, I didn't have any real concerns about him going into midfield.
I don't know, is it Paul Rowan or Philip Quinn in the Mail that makes the point? It shows the flaws in O'Neill's approach as well. Rice was told an hour before the game he was playing.
Yeah, Paul Rowan makes that point.
This still is going on with O'Neill, and I can't understand the thinking behind that and how you can think that's the best way to prepare for an international.
Yeah.
And also, I don't see the sign of coaching on the training ground. You don't see the fruit. What did they do all week? I don't see it on the pitch now.
Yeah, an hour beforehand, Andy. Considering, you as a professional, you would have visualised the evening over and over and over and over again. To be thrust in an hour beforehand is very difficult.
Yeah, I guess it's the school of thought that you keep all the players on their toes and that there's no one slacking off, because there could always be a late injury and you might have to be ready anyway, and you step into the breach at the last minute. That's the only defence you can think of. But just go back to the quotes about comparing him to Paul McGrath. I would say that's probably maybe part of the wooing of Declan Rice,
possibly,
from Martin O'Neill, because he would bat him away, those type of things.
And they have made a big effort. Like they brought him to the training camp at Fota Island a year ago, even though he wasn't part of the squad. They have made a big effort for him to feel part of it all. His father was there as well, but Jack Grealish's father used to go to a lot of games, so who knows?
Morally blackmailing him to come in.
No, if I was betting on it, I would be fairly confident Declan Rice will stay, but I have a feeling there might be a last push from him.
He's come through the system.
Gareth Southgate has said he's on the radar still, or we're keeping tabs on the situation.
What would you prefer, to be a bit part player with an English team, which might never succeed anyway, which is, would you prefer to be a star?
But will he
star
necessarily
man?
be a bit part player? Like, you look at the England squad last week, Dominic Solanke of Liverpool was on it. Dominic Solanke's never scored a goal for Liverpool or Chelsea, and he's in the England squad. There's other players
But
there.
those are friendlies too.
Yeah, but they have a core of very good players, but there are a lot of guys that aren't particularly special. Andy, I would think he would be up in the mix in the next few years with them.
It was fairly grim viewing though, and even the mention of the 3-5-2, it was more of a 5. Like, if you're going to have Coleman and McLean there as your wing backs and you want them to get forward, you can't just boot the ball forward to 5'10" Shawnee Maguire, because there's no time for them to run 60 yards up a field. The Irish midfield have to get hold of the ball for at least 40 seconds to give Coleman and McLean the time to get up ahead of the ball, or certainly in line with the ball. If you just have Duffy booting it, and it's up to Maguire, who's going to lose the header, and you're McLean or Coleman, you're not going to sprint after that. Why would you even budge? And so that's why, beefing up the midfield,
there's a very interesting thing happening with the Ireland football team as well, Joe. It's 20 years today since Ireland played the Czech Republic in a friendly in Olomouc, and 6 players. Mick McCarthy gave his debut to 6 players.
I've missed that anniversary, I must say, Kieran, but well done.
No, but because the reason it's significant, 6 players made their debut that night, including Robbie Keane, Damien Duff, Mark Kinsella, but 5 of the 6 were from Dublin. And that was the year, that was 98, the year Ireland would win European Championships at under 16, under 18, with a hell of a lot of Dublin players. Against Turkey, one Dubliner started. Ireland under 21s played Iceland last week, beat them in a friendly. The starting lineup, there wasn't a single player from Dublin. In the initial 30-man squad to play Turkey, there were 4 players from Dublin, 6 from Cork, 3 from Derry. Where have the Dublin players gone? And training for years with Ireland, they used to play a training game, Dublin against the rest. They couldn't even manage enough for a 5-a-side team now. And you have to think, Dublin is nearly half the population of the country, huge soccer tradition. Where are the footballers? And I think you have to look at who was there 20 years ago producing young players. Brian Kerr, Noel O'Reilly. I think that has to be part of it. Like, the underage teams now, there's so many players that are UK born, like a huge percentage. And Dublin is struggling for recognition. Yeah,
I hadn't realised it was that chronic. It's extraordinary.
I don't know particularly the reasons. I'm sure, you'd need to look into it deeper with the people who are on the ground, or the FA, the coaches, etc. Yeah. But all the talk 20 years ago was Tala, was because Richard Dunn, Robbie Keane, Jason Gavin, there was a lot of players coming through from Tala. And, it doesn't seem to be the same hotbed as it was for football.
Yeah, but it's because those kids, Robbie Keane, Damien Duff, they grew up watching the Ireland teams of the 80s and 90s who were successful, and that's what they wanted to be. And now kids have grown up watching Dublin footballers and maybe the Irish rugby players, and then they're going into those.
Possibly, but
those things.
I did a piece in this last summer though. Dublin GA has very largely become middle class. It's struggling in a lot of working class areas. Like the GA have talked about this themselves, both the Dublin County Board and Pádraig Duffy, the GA Director General, particularly West Dublin, where there's huge population, that they don't have enough clubs and they're not getting the numbers. And you go through, like Cooley yesterday, like Dalkey, like places like Dalkey are hotbeds of the GA now. That I don't think it's particularly that the GA or rugby have taken over in working class areas. It's there's some other factor at play. And
maybe it's a lifestyle issue, and
maybe
kids
there's
are just
no sporting pitches.
But I guess you do presume Dunn and Keane were just playing matches on the estate tarmac at them. That's kind of what I was doing a lot of time. Unless people are just sitting inside playing PlayStation, or I mean, maybe that's a part of it. Who knows?
And also there is a flip side that the fact now, like the other night, if Darragh Lenihan had got a cap, he would have been the first Meath man to play for Ireland. In recent years, like Adamstown and Wexford, Kevin Doyle, Shane Long and Tipperary, from Gortnahoe and Tipperary, that there's areas that never produced internationals that are now producing them. And that's a byproduct, as you say, of the Charlton years.
Yeah.
I think that, so the game has spread more, but at the same time, Dublin should be making more of an impact, I would think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Before we move on to our next story, be cognizant of this tweet from Anthony. Lads, the sound of newspapers rustling is excruciating for anyone listening with earphones. Seriously, it's more painful than watching the Irish soccer team play.
It was Andy.
We'll watch these microphones here when we change to our next story, which is Fergal Carruth in the Sunday Business Post. Andy, obviously, Kieran, I know you cover boxing very closely as well. So, the headline here, this is with Ewan McKenna in the business of sport in the Business Plus section. The Sunday Business Post don't make it half hard to find their sports interviews. I mean, they can bury them. We found this one eventually. So this is in the Sunday Business Post Plus section, and it's on page 9, and it's Ewan McKenna with the IABA Chief Executive Fergal Carruth discussing Michael O'Reilly, Billy Walsh, and whether the Irish boxing team can find its way back to being a, quote, new Cuba. So, Andy, you can kick us off here. Fergal Carruth with Ewan McKenna. What jumped out at you?
Not much jumped out at me because I've spoke to Fergal quite a bit over the last couple of years, and it was more or less what I already knew. What you get from the piece, and it's what I get from speaking to Fergal. He's a guy who's at peace with himself, and that he acted correctly in all the dealings in terms of the Billy Walsh issue and the Michael O'Reilly issue, and the young. Well, it kind of seems to be settled now. The difference between the IABA board with Joe Crystal and then the former president Pat Ryan. So,
and has that been sorted out now, the Joe Crystal Pat Ryan thing?
It seems to be, yeah. It seems to be. There was a meeting in Waterford where David O'Brien, who was a board member, who he was going to be the new chairman, proposed, but Fergal dismissed it in the piece and said that a meeting held without enough board members to sanction it, it won't stand. And now he seems that across the board there's approval for Joe Crystal to remain as chairman.
Yeah, he says that meeting, it played out in the media, but there was never any other reality than Joe being in the role, but people have focused on that stuff. What about the rest? Is his take. It's funny, the Billy Walsh shadow, kind of, Ewan makes the point in the piece, it is a very long one. Like, people still think, God, Billy got away is almost the mood music around the IABA this Olympic cycle. That kind of sums it up.
He has got, he was named World Boxing Coach of the Year, so that's always going to be held against him, that this guy is excelling elsewhere. But I think Irish boxing is in a very interesting position, both amateur and professional, because of all that's going on. Like, there's no guarantee boxing will be at the next Olympics. Like, what the IOC are saying at the moment is that they don't want it there because of widespread corruption, because of the guy who's just been elected chairman or head of the AIBA, who has connections to organised crime. And you've all this going on, and amateur boxing, like, there's some great amateur prospects, as you know, but we don't know if they'll be in Tokyo because we don't know what's going to happen in Tokyo. And then the pro side, you have the MTK boycott, which makes it very difficult for the handful of journalists who do cover boxing to like, even I know, like, you can say, you can still write about the fights without interviewing them or whatever, but I know how the media works, and from what I gather, a lot of media outlets, they say, why would you publicise Michael Conn and Carl Frampton's fight if they're boycotting us? So we're just ignoring it. So I don't know how it helps boxing's profile, or it helps any of the boxers. And I think in the public mind, a lot of them, it's got very negative connotations, because the Regency trial has been going on for the Regency shooting trial was on for the last couple of months, and you had the shooting outside the stadium, even though it's nothing to do with boxing, a few months ago. But all that is linked to the public mind with boxing. It doesn't help boxing.
What I will say is that Irish amateur boxing, it's definitely in the rebuilding process, but it's in a good place. There's some huge young talents coming through, like Kieran Malloy, Michael Nevin, Paddy Donovan. These guys are like, if these guys can continue at the pace they're going, there will be in contention for medals. Come Tokyo, and add that to already Joe Ward, who's doing very well in the WSB, has won 2 fights this year, and all of the Irish boxing team are competing in the Commonwealth Games. So, and a young team has gone to the European 22s yesterday. So there is still, like, for all of the trouble that goes on in terms of the grassroots and the boxers that Ireland are producing, there's still world class boxers that are coming through.
Fergal Carruth says, we have a new rule book. This was part of the issue when Walsh left. We have a new rule book where the high performance unit selects the team. We've moved completely to Abbottstown onto the National Sports Campus, and we are now enacting improvements in other areas in terms of boxer development and personal development. So we've committed to really lofty goals. Is it being done the right way? Is that your sense?
I think
that,
that's
like, Bernard has control of the team and there's none of this messing that was going on under Walsh?
I hope they were able to implement that. There was a strategic plan put in place early last year,
You were part of that,
Yeah,
Andy.
it's easy to come up with a plan. Implementing it is going to be the hard. It's always going to be the difficult thing.
What are some of the headline things in that plan?
A few of them are mentioned here.
Exactly,
I think,
the right to be able to choose your team. You know, to be able to choose your team, and to have anonymity to pick your team, isn't it? You know, that was really the main issue, and that was probably the main sticking point.
Yeah, like Fergal mentioned here, there were 30 recommendations.
Yeah.
He says all of them have been implemented. You know, they brought Bernard Dunn in, which was, retained Zora, which was a huge thing, because a lot of nations wanted Zora.
So is it Dunn and Zora who'll get to pick the team now, effectively?
Yeah, Moss. And then I think moving to Abbottstown is a great move, because the problem from my point of view, it was always too incestuous. It was all in the National Stadium. There were people, you were mixing with referees and judges were walking in and out, and the people from the board and coaches from other clubs could just walk in and out while there was team meetings going on and while there was sessions being done, like important sessions and training. So the fact that they're out there, they're away from everything else, and I know it would probably hurts a lot of people in the club system, because they've brought these boxes to this level, to Irish domestic level, to get to this level, and then all of a sudden you have to kind of give your boxer away to the high performance unit, and then they have control of your boxer and tell you when your boxer can fight. So that's an issue that has to be crossed. I'm sure there has to be some communication with the clubs and some involvement with the clubs and the club coaches. But
I think in so many sports, I mean, you bring up the young talented footballer who then goes to a big club in the UK. There almost has to be an element of handing over.
There has to be.
It's tough I'm sure it's very tough for the boxing clubs.
I think maybe, I don't know, better communication between the clubs and high performance, and also given the credit to the clubs as well, I think, would help. That this is not the high performance's achievement alone. This is also comes from the club as well.
That's almost just a PR thing, is it? Just saying it publicly a bit more?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know if that would go some way to help.
Something I talked to both Kenneth Egan and Pete Taylor, when Pete was allowed to talk to us before the boycott in recent months, was the amount of, a huge amount of young Irish boxers have gone pro in the last year or two. I think it might have been 34 last year made their debut or some huge number, but both of them said a lot of them aren't ready. They haven't learned their trade properly, and it's a bit dangerous. Because you were quite young going pro as well. Were you 2021?
A lot of the guys who are turning pro now can't cut it as amateurs.
Yeah.
They're not top class amateurs, and so they have nothing else to do, so they're going to turn pro.
But it's not very dangerous. Like, even in the last few months, there's been 2 deaths in the ring. So
it is very dangerous. And at that type of level, that club domestic level of professional boxing, there's hardly any safety measures in place. There's no drug testing, because there's just not the money to do it. So, I don't know. I see these guys turning pro, and people think it's because they're turning pro, they're fighting at a high level. They're not. The skill level is way below what these top class amateurs are fighting at. Like when you see Katie Taylor, towards the end, when the other countries were catching up with her, the other female competitors were catching up in terms of skill, the fights were very close. But when you see her turn pro, she's kind of walking through and having the fights especially in her early fights. And just because it's on a platform of professional in a big arena, maybe on TV, people think it's a higher standard of boxing, but it's not. And
the reality is a lot of the amateurs are full time, and a lot of the pros aren't. A lot of the pros are jobs, but a lot of the amateurs,
it's only professional in name and nothing else. Certainly not in governance anyway. But only until you get to the top level of, in terms of skill, top level amateurs and top level pros are kind of eye to eye, but it's just a different game they're playing. It's just a different sport that they're participating in.
Yeah.
So there's no aptitude test as such to go pro. There's no one saying, let me see your
Anyone
skills.
Can turn pro.
So I could turn pro.
Not that it's a slide on the guy, but like a Lens. Recently, one of the Leinster fitness coaches made his professional debut. You can never have you can have no amateur experience at all and turn professional.
Right. Yeah. And no one will look at you in advance and say it's actually a safety concern you getting into a ring.
There is certain protocols you have to pass.
Yeah, well, you have to get a license.
And you have to show that you're capable of boxing and obviously pass a medical. But
so I couldn't actually do it.
You could. I train you a couple of weeks. We'll get
a couple of weeks. Yeah. Could you get someone to speed in a couple of weeks to go pro?
Conor McGregor got one in a few weeks.
Well, so a touch of the Wild West about it, Andy. That lower level of professionalism.
I think so. Yeah. And like I said, the guys who are turning professional now, a lot of them, if you haven't heard of them, it just means they couldn't cut it as amateurs.
Yeah. Right. There was actually a really good interview a few weeks ago, and I think it was by Neil Loughran in the Irish News, but it was with 2 journeymen, and they described themselves as journeymen, but. It's basically their life is they get paid to be beaten up, and this is what they do. Like they're the records are just, you look at it, go, it jumps out of you, whatever, 25 fights, 25 defeats, whatever. But that's how they make their money. They're just they're cannon fodder, basically.
And on the Irish scene, is there that professional setup in any great way? Not really.
Yeah, well, for the Irish boxers, if they fight in Ireland, they're usually the ones selling tickets, so they're the home fighters, and there's usually journeymen brought in to fight them.
Yeah.
And these guys are on the circuit. They're usually from Eastern Europe, and
and sometimes they take a fight at 3 or 4 days notice.
Yeah, sometimes they're on the plane when the night before, and they're brought over the day of the fight.
Yeah.
So it's a grim. It's very grim. It's a grim world. But like, those guys can earn £1,500 for a night, nights for a couple of rounds work, and it just supplements their life. If they're probably in a full-time job anyway.
And are there many Irish guys on this circuit? Like, even within Ireland, how many fights like this might be happening on a given week?
Oh, it happens. They had some fights yesterday in Drona. There was a show that Celtic Clash. There was some good fights, but like, there's guys. I don't want to be harsh, but there's guys turning pro in Ireland who are journeymen, but they don't know it. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be harsh. I'm not going to name any names.
Sure.
They're not of a standard of a good professional fighter. They're not even like seasoned pros, but they're turning pro and they're winning fights because they can sell tickets or they get to they'll get to 7 or 8 till they have to fight somebody half decent, and then that'll be that.
And that's when it's potentially dangerous, maybe, when they step up a level without realising what they're in for.
Depends which route they take, but I would be advising them to get you a few wins, be a professional boxer, get 6 or 7 wins, and then get out of it, because you've reached your peak. You got out unhurt, and you can always walk down the street and say, yeah, I'm an undefeated professional fighter. And
is it generally, I know that's quite an interesting point, that if there's guys turning pro that we haven't heard of in the amateur ranks, it's because they weren't good enough and they're just turning pro. Are there even a few cases where you just might not be suited to amateur level and you can turn pro?
There's definitely that, and there's always someone that can surprise you, and develop later.
They're real minority cases, though, are they?
No, yeah. If you look at Spike O'Sullivan, who was never a great amateur, never really an international level amateur, but look what he's doing now as a professional. There's talk that it's been arranged that he'll fight Canelo Alvarez in his next fight, so that's a huge. He's fought at world level as a professional. So there are always. But it depends how you apply yourself as a professional as well, of where you train and who you're training with, and they're with Paddy Collins, and they have a good setup.
And what about this situation with MTK Global, who they don't like the Daniel Kinahan relationship popping up in the media, so they've banned all their boxing from talking to journalists in Ireland?
It's their stance. I think it's counterintuitive. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think they're shooting themselves in the foot, because there's some great stories there to be told, and the fighters, boxing needs as much publicity as you can get, because it's hard. It's a struggle to get fighters to get their names in the paper and get their profile out there, and hopefully there can be some.
Hopefully, it makes no sense as well, Joe. Like, it's a partitionist ban, a boycott. Like, they still talk to Northern Ireland media, and I just had a look out of curiosity. The Northern papers did a search. And Northern papers have written the same stuff about the Kinahan links as the Southern papers. But I think the difference is Carl Frampton, etc., will be fighting in Belfast. So they have to sell tickets at Belfast, so they're not going to boycott Northern media. So there's actually no logic at all behind this ban.
Okay. So that's for Carruth. I suppose ultimately he'll be judged each Olympic cycle. That's how this will work.
Yeah. We spoke about comparing us to New Zealand, and we're speaking to Fergal. Like, they have an 8-year cycle that they prepare for, not just Olympics to Olympics, which unfortunately we have to do. And our boxing's funding was cut after the last Olympics. I think 900,000, 700,000, which is still getting 700,000, but it's a big cut, and expenses are always going up. So it's. And unfortunately, I know what you said about participation and that, but money does usually equal medals. Once there's money put in, and it's seen across the boards with other countries, when there's money put in terms of coaching and facilities and being able to send boxers or any athletes to compete in tournaments and training camps abroad, it usually equates to medals.
And that kind of rounds off what we were saying about having a national policy document in place, whereby we can say as a country, well, we want to designate this much money to give our elite athletes the very, very best chance, and this much for just grassroots and participation, and it can work towards a vision. So we'll see how it goes over the next couple of years. There's just page 80 of the Mail on Sunday, Brendan Rodgers with Ollie Holt. I thought this was quite interesting. So I guess you're going up to Brendan Rodgers to interview him if you're Ollie Holt, And like, I'm glad he did it. He basically talks to Rodgers about the perception of him, that he's this kind of naff, midlife crisis, David Brent, white teeth, egomaniac. Effectively, he
like
brings
it's
it
all
up with
rooted.
him.
I think it's rooted in this. Do you remember the series Being Liverpool?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like it all goes back to that, and I think that really damaged Brendan Rodgers from the start, because
for people who didn't see it, it was behind the scenes of his first year in charge.
Yeah, and like there was all these different things in it. Like there was one scene, and it's actually something apparently Alex Ferguson once did, but he had 3 envelopes. And he said something like, the names of a player in one of these envelopes who's going to let me down this year. Who are you going to be the player in that envelope or something? But like it was a stunt. There was no name. But, and then there was things like, and it's referred to in the interview there as well, he had a massive portrait of himself in his house. Like they went to Brendan Rodgers' house, and people just thought this is, the proof that his ego runs rampant. But he points out in this that it was a gift from a charity for disabled that he had links with when he was Swansea boss, so it wasn't his own ego. But he does. He
said it had sentimental value.
Yeah,
I mean, but it is unfortunate when the thing that has sentimental value from your charity work is a giant portrait of you, which you put up in your own living room. I mean, look, maybe put it in the bathroom or somewhere, but it was in the living room.
It reminds me of you remember the stalker in Alan Partridge when he went into took him into the living room, and there was a massive picture of a scantily clad woman draped on a Harley Davidson or something, and Partridge is looking at us and it has a certain haunting quality. I think Brendan Rodgers' portrait is similar. But he does make the point, both his parents died very young, 53 and 59.
Yeah.
So he lost a lot of weight, and he kind of got a grip of himself health-wise. And this is when people said we had a midlife crisis, cleaned his teeth, got his teeth fixed, etc. But he was saying, the reason I lost 3 stone was I didn't want to be going as young as those. I saw what happened to my parents. And but at times he's his own worst enemy, because I remember a time at Liverpool when they had a bad run and they seemed to turn it around, then they went 10 or 12 games unbeaten, and he gave interviews all over the place about how he changed training and how he done this and that, and then and it appeared in the papers the day I think of a game with United, and United stuffed them. And it always seemed to be that when things were going well, he got carried away and talked himself up too much. But people who've worked with him rate him really highly as a coach. They really do. And like there's really interesting stuff there about spending. Like they're playing Zenit St. Petersburg, played Zenit St. Petersburg, sorry. In the last 12 months, Celtic have spent 7.4 million. Zenit have spent 89 million. Like people don't realise how tiny Celtic's budget is.
I want to get your thoughts on Andy, just to give people at home a deeper flavour of the interview. They talk about when things started. Ollie Holt talks about when things started to go badly at Liverpool, people sought to discredit Rodgers with personal attacks. They said the success had changed him. They mocked the fact he had his teeth whitened. They said he had a tan. They noted his divorce and his new relationship. They said he had lost weight. They said he was self-important. And he puts as well to him, Rodgers says, I heard all that. But to lead a big club, and I think this is a fair point, to lead a big club, you have to have belief, you have to have the optimism to go in each day and to improve and be happy. When you've been coaching since you were 20 and you're working your way through from having no playing career, you have to have a certain level of confidence. And then Joey Barton talked about Rodgers when he moved up to Glasgow, like, do you see him much? And Barton at the time said the places he goes to and the places I go probably differ with the tan and the teeth and all that. They're not the kind of establishments I rock up at. I'm not having a midlife crisis. And Holt puts this to Rodgers, and he said Rodgers just smiled. But then he talks about losing his parents young, and that being maybe the big motivation to lose the weight and get himself in order, as opposed to any kind of maybe narcissism, which is maybe how it felt on the outside, because it did coincide with like Liverpool doing very well, and it seemed like Rodgers almost saying, well, I'm a big time Charlie now, and I'm going to get the teeth done and lose weight.
Yeah, but it seems like he's learned. He says, he talks about his time in Liverpool, how he's going well, and then all of a sudden he was out the door. So he's trying not to get too carried away now.
You buy it?
I don't know if I do, because there's a reason for, like, I don't want to make light of his parents dying, but my parents died, so I'm going to lose weight. That's great, but there's also a byproduct that I look really good, and my teeth need whitening also, to match on my tan, and that's not thinking about your mortality. You don't need your teeth white to
probably not
live forever. But other than that, he's unfortunate because he gets the comedian Darren Farley, which he mentions here, meeting him, he does a great impersonation of Rodgers, and he's just a good target for it, isn't he? You know,
he is. Yeah.
There's a reason, you know. You can't present yourself in a certain way. You kind of leave yourself open, don't you? You know.
Yeah.
He's from a tiny place called Carnlough in Antrim. I think it's a population 700 or 800, or like it's a tiny place, and it's something quite interesting. I was looking at it a while ago. If you like Joe, the coaches and captains of Ireland's soccer and rugby team, Joe Schmidt, Rory Best, Martin O'Neill, Seamus Coleman, combined population of less than 6,000. That for some reason you often get very prominent sports people from very, very tiny places. I don't know why that is.
I do know. I was going to ask what psychological conclusion have you drawn?
I have to work a column out of it sometimes.
Right, okay.
Fish, small ponds, is it?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know.
Well, you can read Brendan Rodgers and see if he's convinced you. Page 80 and 81 of the Mail on Sunday.
Yeah, like Bill Shankly was another. Bill Shankly's 600 people. There's Glenn Buck from a village of 600 people, yeah.
I know this is a coincidence.
I think when Alex Ferguson, Glasgow City Centre. So I'm curious. This is just one of these. I don't think this is a bad idea from the Sunday Times, where it's an international week. What do you do with Graham Souness? What do you do with your football writers? There's not much to talk about. So they've done two things on page 10 and 11. As we try and rustle our papers.
Yeah, very conscious now of that texter and
very
his
gently.
headphones. Yeah.
Think of that poor fella in his headphones. They have Jonathan Northcroft on one page comparing Pep Guardiola to the best teams who ever played in the Premier League. And Northcroft reaches the conclusion that Manchester United 98-99 are the best. And they have, I'm going to come to you on that in a second. And they have Graham Souness as well, picking 11 players who've won the league already into his best all-time Premier League 11, which is the cheapest of all things, but I still looked straight away to see who he'd picked. I'll come to Souness's team in a second. So Northcroft, Andy, looks at City. He says of the current Man City, they are the most choreographed, most prepared, most perfectly coached team in Premier League history, but are they the best? He says the goals and points tally suggest so, but there are other hallmarks for great teams. So the teams he mentions are Arsenal 01 to 04, and for them he holds against them their Champions League failings. Chelsea 04 to 06, pins them down as mainly a defensive side. He touches on the Man United Rooney, Tevez, Ronaldo team, but says certain aspects were ordinary. Nani, John O'Shea, Anderson had 41, 38 and 38 appearances across 07 and 08. They were a side based around Ronaldo's brilliance. And then he gets on to 98-99. 4-4-2 in its ultimate form. Beckham, Roy Keane, Scholes, Ryan Giggs all peaking. Has there ever been a better midfield in English club history? Dwight York, Andy Cole, linked as well as any pair. Peter Schmeichel, cementing his place as the best Premier League team. Beckham with his goals from free kicks. Giggs, the greatest FA Cup goal of all time. And also points out, they won a Champions League final with Keane and Scholes suspended. Won against Arsenal that great game with 10 men. Schmeichel with the last minute save. They beat the Juventus team, which had Zidane, Deschamps, Davids, Conte and Zaghi. Bayern Munich with Kahn, Matthias Effenberg. Inter Milan of Zanetti, Baggio, Simeone, Ronaldo. And Barcelona with Rivaldo, Figo and Enrique. And so he concludes, Andy, that therefore 98-99 still are the greatest Premier League team we have ever seen.
If they played each other, this City team and the United team of 99, City might win because of the style of play and the but it all comes down to what have you won. You have to what medals do you have in your locker? And that's
because this game must be made for City after 3 months of the season.
They might well go on, the next few years.
Absolutely.
But as it stands, United 99 are still the best.
What age were you then, and where did you watch that season?
I watched that final. I remember the final. I watched it in Finglas, where we were staying at the time, and I was on my own. None of my family really watched soccer, so I was on my own, and I was jumping around. And I came out. What's up with you? Why you be? I was like, you can't believe what just happened.
Where do you begin to explain?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, 2 last-minute goals to win the European Cup.
And what was, as a Manchester United fan, it's hard for that team to ever be beaten in terms of like the love you will have for it. They were such an exciting team. They scored so many last-minute goals.
And you always look back with rose-tinted glasses, don't you? Because then, just how they came from behind so many times, and he says it here in the piece. He lists how many times they came from behind, how many late goals they scored, and the teams they beat. And like you said, to win the final without Roy Keane, Price goals.
Because I remember a few years ago, Andy. we had the idea that in Roy Keane's first autobiography, he says that his performance against Juventus was overrated.
Yeah.
So I got onto RT to get a DVD of it and, have a look at it, years later and see how exactly did he. And he was outstandingly. That was Roy being Roy. But what really stands out when you watch it again is Dennis Irwin was amazing that night away to Juventus. Like, he was very close to man of the match. And so was Dwight York. Dwight York was superb. Like, as a player that you don't hear much talk about when people mention United legends, but in a massive game like that, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
For that year, Dwight York was just untouchable. He was phenomenal.
He's got over 100 goals. Was that year in total? So it was kind of linked well.
The team, close to it.
But it's a weekend that, as you say, does lend itself to do something like this. Like I know tomorrow, we, as United related as well, it's 25 years since United has won their first title under Ferguson. So we've done a 12-page pullout on those 25 years that have been so eventful for United. Because there's no Premier League, often when there's an international break, there's 2 games sandwiched on either side of the weekend, but there's nothing this time. Yeah. So people soccer-wise are looking for something a bit different today and tomorrow.
You're open about your allegiance, aren't you?
What allegiance?
A football club.
Go on.
Well, I don't have to say if you how do you feel about the Manchester United 98-99 team as a non-Manchester United supporter?
I would, if you've said about it, I would follow Liverpool, but unlike a lot of Liverpool and United fans, I don't hate United.
Okay.
United fans seem to always hate Liverpool now, and Liverpool fans seem to hate United. But I really admired United, and I wonder was a large part of that because of Roy Keane
and Dennis Irwin. Like, when you think how magical it was to have those two.
Oh,
playing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think so many people in Irish sport, across the board, idolised Roy Keane. Like, Roy Keane, was seen as what we all wanted to be, and the way you wanted to carry yourself, the way he was so outspoken and straight talking and such a leader, that I think it was even if you had an allegiance to a different club, it was always great. I always liked seeing Keane doing well, so that went hand in hand with United going well. So.
There'll never be another Manchester United team like that in your lifetime.
Never say never. Well, who knows?
Not with Mourinho.
Not with the current setup.
Certainly with 2 Irish players being so fundamental.
Yeah.
And the other thing, it's actually mentioned there, as a couple of years later, he's mentioned I think it's the 08-09 team, how John O'Shea played 38 games.
Yeah, he holds that against that team.
I know.
Like Ordinary, Anderson, Nanny and John O'Shea.
Yeah.
They were good, but they played good players. On his day, Anderson controlled the midfield.
Absolutely.
And you know what I mean? And Nanny had some spectacular goals, and some great games.
Well, he's using that as a stick to beat them.
But I think people consistently underrate John O'Shea. Like, John O'Shea, if you look at what he's won, I think only 2 or 3 Irish players ever have won more than him.
Yeah.
And the amount of games he played for Manchester United, like, I think for 7 or 8 seasons in a row, he played at least 30 games. Yeah. Like, you're going to wait a long, long time for an Irish player to do that again.
Yeah. Who's your favourite Manchester United player, Andy, of all time?
Of all time? Roy Keane, Ryan Giggs. Yeah, probably Roy Keane when I was, because he's Irish.
This brings us to the Graham Souness thing. How Roy Keane is still overlooked by so many in England, and I think part of it was his personality. Graham picks, as you were saying, his best 11
of players who, I was going to say who have won a Premier League, but I don't think De Bruyne has won one, has he?
No, of the Premier League era.
Of the Premier League era, right? Okay. Yeah. Schmeichel in goal, Neville, Gary, Rio Ferdinand, John Terry, Ashley Cole at left back. He does say of Ferdinand and Ashley Cole they could have done more going forward. They were in the armchair a little bit because they were so talented. More in the locker is what he says of them, but they're in his team. He's got a 4-3-3. His midfield 3 is Kevin De Bruyne, Paul Scholes, David Silva, and then top 3 Cristiano Ronaldo, Didier Drogba, and Thierry Henry. So look, it's a Scholes or Keane dilemma for him.
Yeah. I think any manager who managed
maybe you don't
both,
have De Bruyne in there.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah.
He said here, I've picked men in this team who would point the finger at each other if it wasn't going well, no matter how big their reputations were. People who would sort problems out on the pitch before the manager had even mentioned it to them. So, would De Bruyne do that? Would David Silva do that? I don't think so. Would Ashley Cole maybe a bit mouthy, but Henry, would he do that? They weren't outspoken players. I don't think they were certainly Keane would be in there. But if that's his criteria.
Yeah. But if you were a manager and you were picking a midfield,
do we not all overrate Roy Keane?
What's that?
Do we not have a giant Irish?
No, I know people say this now. That that's because you're Irish, you overrate. I don't think so. Like Alex Ferguson, in his autobiography, the one written by with Hugh McIlvanney. I remember saying, if I was looking to win the Derby, the boat race, a cup final, the person I turned to is Roy Keane. I can't think of any manager in the world who had all those players at disposal, and he could put Roy Keane. If he's picking his midfield, you'd always have Roy Keane in it. Like Roy Keane, I think, was the most dominant figure of the Premier League for nearly 10 years. Really was. Like people forget now, Paul Scholes is very gifted, but a lot of games United didn't play him. Like Nicky Butt was playing ahead of him in games.
But in his pomp years, they did effectively. It was always Keane and Scholes by a distance. Like it was.
Yeah, it was, yeah. But who was more influential?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think I have an Irish bias as well. But then you have to look at it and say, well, how good was Roy Keane going forward? Really?
He scored 50 goals for United.
Fair amount of goals.
Couldn't Vieira do a lot more going forward though? Wasn't Vieira technically superior to Roy? Had more pace than Roy? Could hurt you both ways. Less so Roy. Roy had phenomenal passing. Wayne Rooney says he's the best passer he played with. But do we not overestimate him? See, I think it's based in personality.
Yeah, it's not, and the presence of the man and the aura of the man on the pitch. And you've seen him in the opposition, and he's coming at, like, I think that's more of it. That was all part of his greatness, I think.
Well, it's noticeable that these like that Fantasy 11 program in Sky where like Paul Merson and some of the lads sit in a fake dressing room and they get players to name their best 11 of players they played with. It is noticeable anyone who's played with Keane has him in it. So that would kind of tie into the fact that there's an aura, there's what he demands from the team, the culture he sets, I think a lot of it as opposed to just his playing ability, which we may overestimate in ways.
I don't know if we overestimate it. I think a lot of players who played against him as well weren't mad about him because of his personality and how abrasive he was, and I think that was reflected in the Players' Player of the Year votes, that he only won it once, and there were at least 2 other seasons he was the outstanding player.
Lads, Roy Keane was a fantastic player, but he was not as good as Patrick Vieira. Serious Irish bias from your panel. It's a text in from Robert Giles. No relation to John.
He might not have been as good, but if you were going to a game, you'd want Keane on your team more than Vieira. And the personality, like, who left a bigger mark on the game? Definitely Keane.
It's a very hard call, to be honest, because the battles between the two of them were fantastic. Like, they were the highlight of the season, Keane Vieira for a couple of seasons.
Okay, we'll leave that one there because there's no happy ending in sight. But that's Graham Souness's team, and Roy Keane once again overlooked. He does, to be fair, he gets overlooked very quickly, I do find, in these when it's British people picking the team. We're pretty much done. We're way over time. We've done kind of well over an hour at this stage, so we won't do any more. Simon Zeba's done a good few interviews talking about how he went out to an Italian restaurant to get away from the Grand Slam game, kept an eye on it in those restaurants, but played with his kids. Can only imagine how grim that afternoon was for him. Is there anything else you want to point people towards to have a read? Not massively.
Neil Francis stirs it up with the People's Game stuff again. If anybody wants to get into that, if anybody really cares what the People's Game is, even though me and Andy know it's boxing. But
is that the People's Game? Yeah, it depends. My thanks to both of you for coming in. Appreciate it. You can podcast the paper review as usual. So Andy Lee and Kieran Cunningham from the Irish Daily Star. My thanks to you. We'll take a short break. Over the next while, we'll have Dermot Gleeson in talking golf, and 20 years since the '98 World Cup, we'll have Rishtard Cooper in talking après match.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
In association with the Air Sport app, allowing you to cast your favourite sporting action from your tablet or mobile phone straight to your TV.
The Moncrief Show is on the road, and this time we're going to Blanchardstown. Come one, come all to what promises